A reading from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. The original text featured is copyright C.S. Lewis Pte. Limited, first published in 1950, and Narnia is a registered trademark. In 1940, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy Pevensey have been evacuated from London to stay with Professor Kirk. The children discover an old wardrobe which acts as a portal into another world. Meanwhile, 900 years after the world of Narnia was first called into being by the Lion Aslan, Jadis, the White Witch, who had previously escaped from the dying world of Charn and sought refuge in the far north, returns to the kingdom of Narnia and takes control as queen, beginning a 100-year reign in which it is always winter and never Christmas. However, there has been much excitement caused by the arrival in Narnia of 4 human children, and Father Christmas has even appeared. Rumours have started to circulate amongst the creatures of Narnia that Aslan has returned. Unfortunately, Edmund has fallen under the influence of the witch, but it seems her control over Narnia is lessening as the long winter is starting to fall. Part 1. Peter's First Battle. There was no trace of the fog now. The sky became bluer and bluer, and now there were white clouds hurrying across it from time to time. In the wide glades there were primroses. A light breeze sprang up, which scattered drops of moisture from the swaying branches and carried cool, delicious scents against the faces of Edmund, the witch, and the dwarf. Soon the beech trees had put forth their delicate, transparent leaves. As they walked under them, the light also became green. A bee buzzed across their path. "This is no fall," said the dwarf. "This is spring. What are we to do? Your winter has been destroyed, I tell you. This is Aslan's doing." "If either of you mention that name again," said the witch, "you shall be instantly killed." While the dwarf and the white witch were saying this, miles away, the beavers and the other 3 children were walking on, hour after hour, into what seemed a delicious dream. Long ago they had left the fur coats behind them. They walked on in silence, drinking it all in, passing through patches of warm sunlight, into cool green thickets, and out into wide mossy glades, where tall elms raised the leafy roof overhead. They had been just as surprised as Edmund when they saw the winter vanishing and the whole wood passing in just a few hours from January to May. They hadn't even known that this would happen when Aslan came to Narnia, but they knew that something had gone wrong with the witch's schemes. They had left the course of the big river some time ago to turn a little to the south to reach the place of the stone table. And now the sun got low, and the light got redder, and the flowers began to think about closing. "Not long now," said Mr. Beaver, and began leading them uphill across some very deep springy moss in place where only tall trees grew, very wide apart. The climb, coming at the end of a long day, made them all pant and blow, and just as Lucy, the youngest child, was wondering whether she could really get to the top without another rest, suddenly they were at the top, and this is what they saw. They were on a green open space from which you could look down on the forest, spreading as far as one could see in every direction, except far to the east there was something twinkling and moving. "By gum," whispered Peter to Susan, "the sea!" In the very middle of this open hilltop was the stone table. It was a great grim slab of grey stone, supported on 4 upright stones. It looked very old, and it was cut all over with strange lines and figures that might be the letters of an unknown language. They gave you a curious feeling when you looked down at them. The next thing they saw was a pavilion, pitched on one side of the open place. A wonderful pavilion it was, and especially now when the light of the setting sun fell upon it, with sides of what looked like yellow silk and cords of crimson, and high above it on a pole a banner which bore a red rampant lion fluttering in the breeze. While they were looking at this, they heard a sound of music on their right, and turning in that direction, they saw what they had come to see. Aslan stood in the centre of a crowd of creatures who had grouped themselves round him in the shape of a half-moon. There were tree women there, and well women who had stringed instruments. There were 4 great centaurs. There was also a unicorn, and a bull with the head of a man, and a pelican, and an eagle, and a great dog. And next to Aslan stood 2 leopards, of whom one carried his crown, and the other his standard. But as for Aslan himself, the beavers and the children didn't know what to do or say, for when they tried to look at Aslan's face, they caught a glimpse of the golden mane and the great solemn overwhelming eyes, and found they couldn't look at him, and went all trembly. "Go on," whispered Mr. Beaver. "No," whispered Peter, "you first." "No, sons of Adam before animals," whispered Mr. Beaver back again. Peter realized that it was up to him. He drew his sword and raised it to the salute, then advanced towards the lion, saying, "We have come, Aslan." "Welcome, Peter, son of Adam," said Aslan. "Welcome, Susan and Lucy, daughters of Eve. Welcome, he-beaver and she-beaver." His voice was deep and rich, and somehow took the fidgets out of them, so that they didn't seem awkward to stand and say nothing. "But where is the 4th?" asked Aslan. "He has tried to betray them and join the White Witch, O Aslan," said Mr. Beaver, and then something made Peter say, "That was partly my fault, Aslan. I was angry with him, and I think that helped him to go wrong." "Please, Aslan," said Lucy, "can anything be done to save Edmund?" "All shall be done," said Aslan, "but it may be harder than you think." And then he was silent again for some time. Up to that moment, Lucy had been thinking how royal and strong and peaceful his face looked. Now he looked sad as well. But in the next minute that expression was gone. He clapped his paws together and said, "Meanwhile, let the feast be prepared. Take these daughters of Eve to the pavilion and minister to them." When the girls had gone, Aslan laid his paw on Peter's shoulder and said, "Come, son of Adam, and I will show you the castle where you are to be king." And Peter, with his sword still drawn in his hand, went with the lion to the eastern edge of the hilltop. There a beautiful sight met their eyes. The sun was setting behind their backs. That meant that the whole country below them lay in the evening light, forest and hills and valleys, winding away like a silver snake the lower part of the great river. And all this, beyond this, miles away, was the sea, and beyond the sea the sky full of clouds, which were just turning rose colour with the reflection of the sunset. But just where the land of Narnia met the sea, there was something on a little hill shining. It was a castle, and the sunlight was reflected from all the windows. To Peter it looked like a great star resting on the seashore. "That, O man," said Aslan, "is Cair Paravel of the 4 thrones, in one of which you must sit as High King over all the rest." Peter said nothing, for at that moment a strange noise woke the silence. It was like a bugle, but richer. "It is your sister Susan's horn," said Aslan in a low voice. The other creature started forward, but Aslan said with a wave of his paw, "Back! Let the prince win his spurs." Peter ran back to the pavilion and saw a dreadful sight. It looked like an Alsatian, though it was far too big to be a dog. Then he realized it was a wolf, standing on its hind legs, with its front paws against the tree trunk, snapping and snarling at Susan, who had climbed up the tree to escape. All the hair on its back stood up on end. Susan had not been able to get higher than the second big branch, and Peter realized she was going to faint, and if she fainted she would fall off. Peter didn't feel very brave, but that made no difference to what he had to do. He rushed straight up to the monster and aimed a slash of his sword at his side. The stroke never reached the wolf. Quick as lightning it turned round, its eyes flaming and mouth wide open in a howl of anger. If it had not been so angry, it would have got Peter at once. As it was, Peter had just time to duck down and plunge his sword between the brute's forelegs into its heart. A moment later he found that the monster lay dead, and he had drawn his sword out of it. He straightened his back and rubbed the sweat off his face and out of his eyes. He felt tired all over. Susan came down from the tree. Meanwhile, Aslan had spotted another wolf and ordered a dozen or so of the swiftest centaurs and eagles to pursue it, to find the White Witch and rescue Edmund. Peter, still out of breath, turned and saw Aslan close at hand. "You have forgotten to clean your sword," said Aslan. Peter blushed when he saw the bright blade smeared with the wolf's hair and blood. He stooped down and wiped it quite clean on the grass, and then wiped it quite dry on his coat. "Hand it to me and kneel, son of Adam," said Aslan. And when Peter had done so, he struck him with the flat of the blade and said, "Rise up, Sir Peter Wolfsbane, and whatever happens, never forget to wipe your sword." To be continued. In the next part, Edmund, who is still with the witch, finds himself in extreme danger.